To write books, you need books. On today's episode, we're talking about some of our favorite titles that get us in the mood to write and make us better at our craft. Welcome to Everything Cookbooks, the podcast for readers, writers, and cooks. This is Kate Leahy, and I'm here with Kristin Donnelly, Andrea Nguyen, and Molly Stevens. Hey everyone, welcome back.
Hey.
Hi, I'm
Everybody.
waving like you all can see
I know.
me.
I know through the magic of audio waves, we can really tell you're waving.
Season 5.
I know, season 5. Here we are.
Crazy. Starting our second year of podcasting.
Wait, third year.
Third year.
Molly,
Finished,
my God.
completed our second year, starting our third.
It seems like the second year, but it's really the third.
That's how much fun we're having. So today, we all know our podcast is called Everything Cookbooks. We talk a lot about cookbooks for a good reason. Today, we're going to just expand it a little bit more to talk about books and other sources of inspiration that help us be better at our craft. And so first off, before we get into the heart of the episode, I just wanted to back up and say, what are some of the challenges that you all have faced when improving your craft as a cookbook author, as a writer in general, as a recipe developer? Kristin, anything that comes to mind for you?
So I started when I was in my 20s as an intern at Food and Wine magazine and would sometimes get these writing assignments and would be totally rewritten all the time. They would still give me the byline, which was very nice, but it was a rewrite. And so honestly, it was that repeat. And I finally just started taking examples of work that other editors wrote that got published with very few edits and looking at my stuff and looking at their stuff and trying to figure out what are they doing that I'm not doing? And that is one of the ways I got better. It was almost this surgical analysis that I did of other people's writing.
Yeah, I love that story. I've heard you talk about that sort of learning.
I think I've written it before.
Yeah, but it's just so interesting, looking at other people's, and I think that's what we're going to talk about today is, where do you find inspiration? Where do you find instruction? But I'm always curious with cookbook authors, how many of us start out wanting to be writers or wanting to, I feel like for me, my background is I wanted to be a writer since I was a kid. I just wanted to write. Before food became my career, I just had this sort of thing in become a writer. And it wasn't until I discovered food that I had something to write about, and it all came together for me. But there are a lot of people who come to cookbook writing not as writers first.
Right, as cooks first.
As cooks, as people who love cookbooks. So it's a very, I'm really interested to hear everybody else's, story and how you learn to do what we do, because there's so many different ways to approach it and to get into it.
I'm one of those people who just loved cookbooks, but wasn't a writer. And I struggled with writing because English isn't my native language. But I learned the language of writing recipes and cookbooks. And I would read the instructions, I would read the head notes, and I would read the, front matter and back matter so I could learn about food and culture. So then I was trying to parrot back some of that stuff. And sometimes at the front end of my career, I felt like I was coming off a little bit too academic and stiff sometimes.
Mm-hmm.
But I worked on that over time. But I struggle to just try to have that voice that's friendly, but yet at the same time, still a voice of authority,
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And so I did not grow up thinking that I wanted to write, I'm like the AP English student who squeaked by when I got a 3 on my AP exam, okay? Squeak.
I'm trying to remember the AP scoring, I was I don't know, is the 3 the top? Is the 3? I don't even remember.
3 is sea level. It's passing, barely.
I think I got a 3 too, Andrea. So I think I like to write, but the way they taught you in school did not make me like to write. So then I kind of went away from it for a while and just thought, oh, I'm not a good writer. I did do college newspapers and I did reporting and, writing at least journalistic style articles. So I think I thought I guess I'll be a journalist where the writing can be pretty straightforward. Yeah, similar to Molly, then sort of found my way to food and then how can you pair them? And then I think over time started working on a little more like style and training myself.
Both Kristin and Andrea's examples, I think, are really important in that there's several kinds of reading. And when you're reading something for enjoyment or you're reading it for information, but when you're reading it to teach yourself, to improve your own craft. So when you're reading it to, either you say parrot it back. So reading a cookbook and not just saying, oh, that's really, I love that head note, or that recipe is so easy to follow. To step back or step forward or whatever way you have to step, to then say, what's making it? Why do I like it? What are the elements of it? And that's the place, I think, was what we want to talk about today, is reading with that critical eye, not like, oh, that's a beautiful passage, or it's so evocative, or I'd never thought of it that way. Okay, why? Like, ask yourself why. Kristin, you would like take notes or take it apart, or anytime anything's been edited, look at those edits really hard. And so there's this the book I'm going to mention later today, but there's one line and the author says, flow is something the reader experiences, not the writer.
So true.
Right? So you're looking to have your prose be whatever it is you want it. Do you want it to be, poetic or moving or really straightforward, informative? Find passages that do that and then figure out why. How'd they do that? Like, Can you figure out how they did that?
Yeah.
Because I think what's hard at our stage now, when you have cookbooks under your belt, you're helping maybe other people write cookbooks or you're writing your own work. When you're first starting to do it, there's this huge learning curve and it's very exciting. Everything is new. So you have so much to learn. And then you get to a point where you kind of learned the basics. And now, but like, how do you get to the next level? So I think today what we'll do is we'll talk a little bit about ways like to just get better every time you sit down, because I think it's a long career relies on, being curious all the time. And so we're just going to talk a little bit about being curious, actually about the words on the page. So I thought we'd just go into talking about just general writing craft books. There's a lot out there. Some of them are not good. Some of them are great. Some of them maybe you should have on your shelves. And some of them maybe just pick up, find a couple things that are interesting, write them down, and maybe in your own notebook, just to turn back to for inspiration. Molly, is the quote that you mentioned, is that from a general craft book or is that a food book?
No, it's a general craft book. It's an interesting book, and it's called Several Short Sentences About Writing. And it's an author, Verilyn Klinkenberg. And it's almost like slam poetry, the way it's written. It's really kind of, just as the title suggests. Something you said earlier, I think is really important too, to find, like a lot of the books I've been looking at in preparation of this conversation, they're not for everybody. Like there's some, it's like, I like that, but it's a little too self-helpy, or I like that. So there's a reason there are a lot of different books on writing, because they're not for everyone. Anyway, but this book by Klinkenberg, it can feel a little, I don't want to say pretentious at times, maybe, no, he sort of assumes that you've studied writing before. So maybe that's why it appealed to me, because I did study writing, So I think it's not for everybody. And a lot of these books, you just find the ones that speak to you. But there's a lot that I really like about this, because it really does talk about sentences, because I really think sentences, like the structure, the length, the rhythm, like I really believe in, a mix of variety of sentences, some short sentences, some long sentences. But I'll read another line from this book just to give you, but he says, writing isn't a conveyor belt bearing the reader to the point at the end of the piece where meaning will be revealed. Good writing is significant everywhere, delightful everywhere. And that's really being really writerly. Like, you're not wasting words. The writing itself should be, it's not a joy to do, or maybe you're lucky if it is, but the writing is the work, but it should be a delight to read.
Right.
Maybe satisfying at the very least.
Satisfying.
Right?
Yes. Yeah. Anyways, that's one book.
Yeah, but Molly, you bring up a really important, it's not just really important. It's like too many words, too many syllables. It's just. It's key. Is to put your reader first and not yourself.
Totally.
And I think so many times when we go into writing, we're like, oh my God, I want to express myself. This is me. But it's like you go on and on and on, and you're not thinking about your reader and how you can just provide information that really helps them. And I think, because like cookbooks, I mean, they are at the end of the line a service kind of thing, right?
Right.
And there's only so many words and so much space for those words. So lately I've been going to a book called Smart Brevity, which is written by Jim Vanderhey, Mike Allen, and Roy Schwartz, who are co-founded like Axios and Politico. It's helped me at times when, for example, when I was writing a book proposal and I was like, yeah, I just want to get my words across. And then they go, just use bullets. And I was like, oh, that's nice. And they're like, don't waste your readers' time. We're all reading memos nowadays. Way too long. Keep it short. And so it's one of these things where they just cut to the chase. And sometimes it's a little bit too like memo-y and kind of too businessy, but it helps me to always think of my reader. And it helps me like with my Substack newsletter. The idea of like just keeping your reader at the forefront and not so much just trying to express yourself. You want to do that, that's great. But a cookbook may not be that place for you.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's the cool thing today is that you have a lot of writers or cookbook authors have multiple platforms.
Right.
We see this where in your Substack, you might have, one part of what you share, but as your book is, you have different ways and different places to share different things.
Right. And I would think that the idea of brevity is so important, especially today, the TLDR, too long, didn't read acronym. Mm-hmm. But also sometimes we think something that took us a long time to write is long, whereas something that took you a long time to write might actually be only 2 sentences. It was just really hard to think of those 2 sentences that really brought those ideas together. So sometimes if you think something's taking you too long, it might actually not feel that way to the reader at all. So it's that idea of, like Andrea, you're saying, keeping the reader in mind, especially in the editing process, is really important. And some craft books do talk about that, like talk about how to think about the reader. I do have a craft book to recommend that's not about the reader, but it's just one that I think everyone should have. It's basically being billed as like the new Strunk & White. I know, Molly, you're a fan of this book.
I love this
Dryer's
book.
English. Does anyone else have a copy?
No.
Tell us more.
It's so good.
Let's talk about this subtitle first.
Yes.
An utterly correct guide to clarity and style.
I know. I think it might be the only sort of grammar and style book I've read that's a delight to read. I mean, Molly, what do you think?
Absolutely. It's a delight to read. He's funny. He was a copy editor, Benjamin Dreyer, who wrote it. I think my only problem reading it is I can't retain all the information because there's so much information in it. But it's hard to explain what this book is.
I would say that I've used it where there was a sentence structure. Sometimes, for example, colons, like, do you capitalize like after the colon? Do you not capitalize? And that rule, there's always like those couple of grammar rules. I think everyone has them that you have to think a couple times before you get it right. And this book will just, you can look it up and you will find that information. And then there'll be a little sort of quip or anecdote or something that can help you maybe retain that better the next time.
Okay, so it's Chicago manual style with a little humanity.
Yeah. And he talks, though, about Chicago manualist style and then how this would be the, Associated Press style. And he has like opinions about this, which is like really fun to read. Somebody with so many opinions on style.
That is fun.
There's a chapter called The Confusables, and it's like palette, and palette. The three different, and outlines it, and his prose underneath about how and when to use the various ones is very funny and memorable. And so there are a lot of that. And then there's the one about things to delete that's really useful. Like you don't have to say the ATM machine. It's an ATM because the M is machine.
You don't have to say actually, usually.
Right. And what was the other one? Commonly misspelled words and things like that. It's very well done. But there is a lot of hard grammar in it too. It's very humane.
That's cool. For some of this stuff, like untangling sentences or just getting rid of words like actually, I now use the tool Grammarly a lot. I love it. I run almost everything through it. And it just does that, like last, like nip tuck. So it's not a book and it's not necessarily telling you all the why, which I think is really interesting, but just as a tool for writers, especially if you're doing a lot online and you just want a final check and you don't have time to have like another human edit your work.
Yeah, a friend who shares our love for Dryers calls it a nerd fest. So nice. I wonder if there's some writers who just love language and love sentences and I am one of those, and I just think it's endlessly interesting to read about sentence structure.
I'm like thinking a combination of what Kristin just mentioned and dryers, and I'm thinking, so how does this fit into the world of AI that, essentially Grammarly and
Grammarly is an AI tool, yeah.
How does it all fit in together? And that is...
Yeah. Well, one thing that I thought was really refreshing about this book is that I went to Northwestern's Medill School of Journalism, and anyone who comes out of that program has certain rules that they learned. For example, you always get an F if you spell someone's name wrong, which is a good rule. They had very specific things like champing at the bit. It's never chomping at the bit. And champing at the bit is so ingrained in my head. I get really excited when I hear someone say he was champing at the bit to get this started on a podcast. I'm like, oh my God. And then here comes Dreyer's English with his opinions. And he's like, get off your high horse for thinking that champing at the bit is so cool that that. It's not chomping, but do we really care anymore? And so you get that sort of layer of humanity that these rules that I was so proud that I retained these after all these years, it's maybe not the most important thing. Why would I use champing at the bit if there's a better way to say it? Do I really need to reference it that way? So there's
a website, Grammarphobia.
No.
And they've written some books and they have a blog, and it's really there's a lot there for want to nerd out on this, but there's one I don't know if it was a blog post or an essay, but it's The Living Dead, and the House of Grammar has many rooms. Some of them are haunted, and despite the best efforts of grammatical exorcists, the ghosts of dead rules and spirits and imaginary taboos are still rattling and thumping about the place. And so there are a lot of things, and especially now we talk to people on the podcast all the time who break rules left and right, and it works. So it's that notion of, how do we hang fast to these rules, or do we let them go? Do you need to know the rules to break the rules?
It's like ending with a preposition.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Like I have a friend who would just go do gymnastics in writing to avoid that. And you're like, it's awkward. It's not how people talk. Let's just stop.
But there's so much language now that changes. For example, people don't say, I appreciate you anymore. It's just, appreciate you.
Oh,
yep.
Yeah, like in digital communication or something, right?
Yeah, appreciate you. And I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Where's your subject? I didn't study English, and to drop the damn subject, you got a verb and an object.
Objects, verbs, adjectives, the dreaded adverb.
But you should know what an adverb and an adjective are. You should have that basic.
Yeah, I think it's good to have a knowledge of what it is.
Oh, and especially if you've learned another language, if you're coming from a different language, you have to know these different types of words and what they do, because they'll be in a different order. They'll be used differently, which gives you an edge, multilingual authors. So, Andrea, you came in with this with an edge already.
Oh, but it's now confusing, because I feel like modern language, it's changing so quickly that, especially English is so universal, right? It's like English is the lingua franca in many respects. And so keeping up with it is a whole nother language.
Oh, for
it's
sure.
like Esperanto.
Oh my gosh. This is a tangent. I'm really sorry to go on this tangent, but I read Lauren Collins's book, When in French, Love in a Second Language. She talks about how there's a lot of English words that infiltrate French, especially in the business world. There is a group that gets together that tries to find French alternatives for these English phrases. And they'll kind of sit and have heated debates about what the French version of this word is going to be. And it's usually some long phrase that is not as succinct as memo. I don't know if that's one, but
Le weekend.
The weekend is a perfect example. Yeah, I mean, now that's so accepted. But yeah, each time a new one comes in, they have their list, and they go through the French alternatives, and then they put out their list. And unfortunately, most people just ignore them and keep using the English word.
That sounds like fun.
It was a really fun book.
Well, I thought that was a great tangent. So, Kristin, thanks for taking us down it.
No, but I was just going to say, I think one of the reasons we wanted to have this conversation is because we're entirely geeky about writing books, but also that idea that you are trying to improve as a writer as much as you're trying to continue to grow your career as a cookbook author. That's just something I think we all share, that, I would like to continue to become a better writer. And so how do you do that? Yes, you do it by doing, but there are also other ways to learn and to stay inspired.
Right. One idea I wanted to bring up, I got it from a book I really like. Here's a hint on looking at craft books. I like short craft books because any craft book that is too long, you're not going to look at it and you're going to spend all this time reading about the craft and not actually writing. Like you said, Molly, you got to actually do the thing to get better at it. But Refuse to Be Done is a lovely short craft book, and it's geared to novelists. It's called How to Write and Rewrite a Novel in 3 Drafts by Matt Bell, who teaches creative writing. Even though it has a lot to do with fiction, there are some takeaways for any type of writing. And one of them I thought is feed your imagination. You need to replenish your, as he says it, your stockpile whenever you find your supply of inspiration wearing down. And I feel like that's something that can go into any art form, but it certainly comes into cookbooks and recipe development. How do you feed your inspiration?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I think when is also important. I find if I'm really midstream in a book and I'm always struggling midstream, but I have to not read as much then because I'm often comparing myself to other authors and especially ones that I really admire. And I read their stuff and I'm like, that's it. I'm done. I'm out. I can't.
Yeah.
Like, because it's too good. I'll never reach that bar kind of thing. So I love what you're saying, what Matt Bell is saying about feeding your imagination, but doing it in a more dormant phase or a more developmental phase for me anyway.
Right. It could be just going to the grocery store. It could be going to a museum. It could be something probably for say cookbooks that isn't looking at other cookbooks, because I think I know what you mean, Molly. You start getting into, and you're looking at a finished product and your product is very much still in the works, and it can be really stifling as a creator to keep wanting to push forward when you're comparing yourself to finished work.
Well, and like that fear of being influenced.
Yeah, right.
Yeah. Do you guys read novels?
I do.
Sometimes.
Novels, short stories are so wonderful for your brain to just take a break. And then you learn story building and, in a different way. And maybe even like I pick up action verbs, and food figures into a lot of fiction writing nowadays. So like you can just find these little nuggets and just open up your brain, and it may not be obvious right away, but you're seeding new ideas that maybe you can pull out once in a while, or your brain pulls it out. You don't even know it, and then you think you're a damn genius. But
well, yeah, because there's so much recipe speak. There's so much, there's so much language. If we only read about food, it's so limiting, and you find we use the same phraseology over and over and over again.
Yeah, I'm always looking for the alternative to stir. Help me.
Fold it in. Just kidding.
Too many character counts. Leahy.
I know. And one not pet peeve, but I'm reading Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow, and it's a great book. But last night I was at a point where a character eats a persimmon, and she compares it to a cross between a melon and a ripe peach. And I really disagree. I don't think a Fuyu persimmon has anything to do with a melon and a ripe peach. I mean, what would you? But then I started thinking, well, how would I describe this? But anyway, I was like, anyway. But that was something I started thinking about. I'm like, ooh. So when you write about food, you might have an edge in certain types of writing, like talking about flavor. You can feel like, oh, I have this superpower that'll help me figure out the other writing stuff.
Sometimes it
that
does feel awkward in fiction where you can tell they're not really food people.
Yeah.
It's a total pet peeve when and you'll be reading along totally in this, imaginary world and having a lovely time out of your own reality, and suddenly they, like you say, they describe something and you're like, it doesn't taste like that, and boom, you're back and you're like, damn it.
We should have like the Bad Food Description Fiction Award or something, like finding like the most literary terrible description of food, a little like Rotten Tomatoes Award.
It's making me think that I get hired to read, be a expert reader for books that aren't about food, but for the
Dear publisher.
Dear publisher.
Yeah, dear publisher, we have the superpowers to help you write
to
about
read
food
your
better.
Non-food books for food veracity,
food accuracy.
And, there you go.
Cultural improprieties.
Food sensitivity reads.
Right, I know. Food flavor read. We could be the flavor read.
Yeah, call us.
Yeah, we're available.
We need the money.
Yes. You love Everything Cookbooks, right? And we love making it for you. Here's your chance to help us keep it going. Go to everythingcookbooks.com/support. There you'll find links to all our new great merch, including t-shirts, sweatshirts, even a hat, and our bookstore where we earn commission on every book you buy. You can also leave us a review wherever you listen to the show. Again, that's everythingcookbooks.com/support to find all the ways to show us the love. And thanks for listening. This is still also to do with that book, Refuse to be Done, but this is a different example. One of his tips when you're writing that draft is learn what book you're not writing. And I think this is also an important lesson when you're writing a book, to learn what book you might think you're writing this one book, but you have to take a step back sometimes and think, oh, for example, like Andrea, you mentioned sometimes people write too much. I think in our last episode, people write, they overwrite. It's like, well, maybe they think they're writing a memoir, but they really need to be writing a 101 baking book. What book are you really writing? And an example that I thought of from our back issues, I guess not back issues, but our archives of episodes was when Molly and I spoke with Amy Thielen. And she wrote this really, really well-written book called Company. She talked about how she developed crabby grandma voice. And it was really she describes it, she was confronting her own sort of persona because she had written this book about Midwestern cooking and she had a cooking show and then she wrote a memoir. And then she's just like, who the heck is this person and who do I want to be as a writer? And she figured out, through a lot of work already, she realized this needed to be a conversation with the person in the kitchen before people came over. And she was that crabby grandma who was going to tell people how it was going to be. And it wasn't always going to be a beautiful thing or a good thing. And you're going to have to do dishes. And that's something that is kind of like figuring out the ear of your story. Who are you talking to? And I just thought that if you haven't listened to that episode with Amy Thielen, I think it's worth going back to listen to, just the way she talks about writing and voice.
So interesting, because it's like, in the end, it's like, who is your reader, right? I mean, that's exactly what it comes down to. Who is your reader? And I was going to say, when we were originally talking about this episode and it was craft writing books, I was like, gosh, I haven't read a craft writing book in a very long time, at least like some of the classics you think about, like The Strunk and White or Bird by Bird. I read it in college and I should revisit, but haven't. But I was thinking I have read copywriting books more recently because I've been doing more of that. And, copywriting, like number one thing is like, who are you talking to? Who is your customer? And I feel like the influence of learning about copywriting has actually it's come in a little bit into the other types of writing I do, because I try to think like sometimes very specific people, like who am I talking to? And a book I'll recommend is it's called The Copybook. Me, who likes to actually look at lots of examples, that's what it is. It's like all these copywriters, what they felt like was some of their best work, and them describing either why it works or like kind of the behind the scenes and how they got there. And sometimes they pick it apart or even diagram it. That is a real fun book to just pick up every once in a while when you need a little inspiration.
Absolutely. So fascinating. Yeah.
You mentioned Strunk and White, and there are others. You talked a lot about dryers, but we got a listener wrote in recently, and I think they're asking, this is such a broad question, but so learning to write a good sentence, learning to write a cohesive paragraph, those are all things that you need to do if you want to write a cookbook in one way or the other. And whether you are writing sentences that are bullets or you're writing in a journalistic style, I mean, you could choose your style. There's a lot more room than there used to be, certainly. But this listener said, is there a standard in terms of recipe style? Do you use articles, add the flour, the sugar, the eggs, or just add flour, sugar, eggs? Do you heat or preheat? And they're asking, is there a place you can go to find, where the correct style for this stuff is? And it's such a huge question. I think there are some books, and we could talk about the books that there are. There are also style sheets that if you're working with a publisher or a magazine, they will have their own house style. But I think the bigger, everybody weigh in on this. The big answer to this is no. There's no universally accepted standard, but yet there are guidelines. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a great question. And yet another opportunity for us. Dear publisher, if anyone wants to hire us to do that, that'd be really great too. But you as the author get to create that style for yourself, and that's part of your voice. And it depends on who you're talking to, what your design goals are, whether or not you have stir flour into mixture or stir the flour into the mixture. There was a movie where Truman Capote would say, "Don't forget your determiners and the articles." I mean, there's like some line, and Truman Capote had a particular voice that rings in my brain. But nowadays, also, publishers have told me everything is negotiable.
So they'll like give you a style sheet.
They'll give you a style sheet,
but as a guideline. But if you want to go off style sheet, that's totally fine.
As long as you're consistent.
Yeah,
exactly. Right. As long as you're consistent. And I remember when I started out, Lorena Jones told me when I asked for the style sheet, and she said, "Oh my God, you're such a pro. I asked for a style sheet." I was like, "Yeah, I want to know the rules that you guys are following." And they had some. And then she said, "But you also want to add your own style." So that's always there. But I think that there are even like other things now that you can bend as an author, which I think has good points and bad points, because you can, start bad habits.
Mm-hmm. Right. So how do you feel about like knowing the rules before you break them? Like the books, what is it? Recipes into Type? Is that one of the sort of standards?
Yes.
Like, is that a worthwhile thing for someone starting out to read and to find out what sort of is considered standard, and then to say, I don't want to do that, I want to do that? Like, I've had people say, what should it be? Teaspoon? Should it be, do I spell out teaspoons or do I? And again, who are you writing for? What, like if it's a magazine, they're going to have a very strict style because magazine, that's the way they do, or newspapers. But when it comes to cookbooks, which is what we talk about more here, Andrea, as you say, it's negotiable, certainly. But you probably want to start by knowing what the rules are that you're going to.
If you're a new like blogger, like, some like a recipe content creator, you're just starting writing recipes. Yeah. You have a lot of decisions to make.
Yeah.
Are you going to use TSP or teaspoon? And,
Right. And I would say using some of the standard, recipes into Type or whatever you want to find, start there, because that's going to make a lot of decisions for you. If you come across something, you're like for, Kate loves my example of heat the oven, not preheat the oven. Preheat doesn't resonate for me, so I heat the oven because so you can make your own choices along the way, but don't make choices just to be weird,
right? Yeah,
to be cool.
Yeah, to be cool. Sorry.
When Molly and Andrea spoke with Ali Slagle, that's a good example of someone who knew the recipe form very well before she branched out to do a different type of style in her own cookbook. I Dream of Dinner. I think that's a good example of like, she kind of had to know the rules before she went in that direction. And it's still a divisive book for people. I think some people love it and some people think, oh, I wish there was a breakout section. Just for people who haven't seen the book now, and correct me if I'm wrong, the ingredients and the method are all combined in the same sort of running text. So if you're used to having the ingredient section broken out separate from the instructions, a lot of people love that because they like to go grocery shopping. It's easier to skim. Other people hate it because they keep having to reference back to, oh, but was it 1/4 cup or 1/2 cup, or does it matter?
She actually has the ingredients in a list, but with no amounts.
Oh,
so
that's
it'll
right.
be like
that's right.
Lemon, chicken, garlic. So there is still that list, but it doesn't really tell you amounts. And then it's in the recipe.
Yeah, and there's no prep instructions.
Yeah, and no prep. The prep is within the method.
And I think if that reader listener question came 10 years ago, I would say, get recipes into Type, learn how to do it. That's how you do it, And now I'd still say find a standard book, but then absorb the information, do a lot of reading on your own, decide what book you want to write, what book you're not writing, that kind of thing.
And there is a newer recipe book that just came out last year, The Complete Recipe Writing Guide by Rayanne Sarazan. And she wrote it geared toward dietitians, but it's universal. It's very thorough.
That's great to hear. There's another book called How to Write Everything. Recipes are only a small piece of it, but it's, how to write anything.
How to write everything. I think the Complete Recipe Writing Guide might be a great place for people to start, especially because Recipes into Type, I believe it's still out of print. It might be harder to track down.
It has been out of print for like 20 years,
I know,
right?
I know.
I feel like it was out of print when I first started writing.
I know. I'm so old. I'm sorry.
It's perennially it's evergreen out of print.
I feel like that's what everybody used to tell me, though. Like, get recipes into Type. And I'm like,
I know.
So how do you guys feel about books like reference books. Like, do you still have reference books that you turn to? Like, if you're trying to figure out, I don't know, a certain fruit or vegetable or something like that. Like spices.
I do. I just bought one.
I have like Oxford Food Companion, Oxford Wine Companion. I have a lot of wine reference books, actually. I have a lot of plant reference books now after working on the Chef's Garden book.
I recently got a spice one and I always cross-reference them. You can't just have one. You really do need to, when you're, working on sort of obscure things or things that are new, you want to cross-reference because sometimes books don't always have everything you need. But I like spice books in particular and plant books because I need help sometimes with descriptors for what something tastes like. It's like you say, what does that pepper taste like? It's like, it's peppery.
Yeah.
It's hot.
I know. Yep.
It's pungent.
It's a cross between a peach and a melon.
Yeah.
Right.
I also love that kind of research. I love going down those rabbit holes to figure out like where something came from, what it's related to, botanically. I just get so, and I'll do hours of research on something, and it might not even make it in, but it's informed me, and it will ultimately inform the work.
Yeah. I just bought a new reference book the other day. It was recommended by Alexis Nicole, aka Black Forager. It's called Native American Ethnobotany.
Oh, cool.
Very cool.
It's like there are a lot of cookbooks out there, but the reference books are the ones that are meant to, be paged through. And honestly, I kind of miss like walking to my gigantic unabridged dictionary. Because like I would go and look something up in the dictionary, and I would then end up like standing there for like 10 minutes learning new words.
Was it on a stand? Is that why you would be standing? Yeah, I love that. I love that.
We had ours. And my husband and I felt so smart, extra smart, having it on a stand.
Yeah. No, but it's really, and I think you really have to be careful too when you Google things. Obviously, it's obvious thing to say, but to cross-reference, even if yes, we still use the internet, of course, to do our research, but to cross-reference it to books as much as you can, it's interesting. I'm so glad to hear about the complete recipe writing guide, because I feel like I've often felt that there should be a new edition of that.
Of recipes into type.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think I looked at the table of contents. I don't have a copy of the book yet, but it looked like it has a lot on how to develop recipes, how to write recipes, and how to test recipes. So it kind of walks you through the process. And I feel like that's a really valuable skill set. Especially if you're starting out and you need to just get some guidance, that probably is a really great book to pick up. I wanted to end this conversation with, we talked a little bit about reference books, but just to go a little bit deeper into reference books, does anybody have any volume 1 or volume 2 of The Flavor Thesaurus? It's by a British author.
Wait, I have the first one because Yotam Ottolenghi told me to get it. He's like, you should really get that book. It's really good. And I'm like, now I know where you get all your ideas. From Nikki.
Absolutely.
I don't have this book. I want this book.
It's so good.
Yeah.
She's humorous. She's clever.
Looks so fun.
I mean, it's definitely in line with what we're talking about, but also that you mentioned recipe development a little while ago, and that recipe development, that where do ideas come from? How do you and just this, it sparks ideas when you read these. It really does. And it sparks them in a context that I find very inspirational.
I think what she does in these books is, like Molly, you're talking about going down those rabbit holes and finding all this information. This book is all about her doing that and looking at all these different types of sources and then synthesizing it. So you can look up, say, dried apricots, and she can tell you about a quirky thing about them, about a flavor, like different flavor profiles she's seen through it, but she does it in like a very witty, pithy way that it's a delightful book. So say you had to develop a recipe and you have maybe all these extra herbs and you're trying to just get new ideas. You could look up cilantro and she could have like just her kind of little take on it. And that could lead you down a different rabbit hole, just like if you were looking up, I say the word pumpkin too many times is, you go through the thesaurus and say like, what's a different way to say pumpkin? Oh, squash. Well, she would be like that, but for the flavor and flavor pairings. So it's, I think, just a really fun thing for people who love food, but especially if you develop and write recipes, why not? Have it on your shelf.
You know what I have is The Flavor Bible by Andrew Dornberg and Karen Page, which that's very much that's one of those books where it's very referencey. So it's like an ingredient and then lots of things that pair with that ingredient.
Yep. Yeah. Also super helpful.
Yeah. I mean, like, unfortunately, like for me, honestly, like a lot of these books are very like Western centric. And like when they try to delve into other cuisines, they don't always get it right. And that's just like, I'm just putting it out there, folks.
Absolutely.
But, again, like you could use them as a starting point and then delve further to cast your net a lot wider to figure out things. Because, Nikki covers so much in her books, but then sometimes I'm like, okay, I just want something very specific. I'm like, of course she's not going to have a particular Vietnamese herb, right? I'm like, I'm asking too much. But I can figure out, jumping off points. And I think that that's very valuable nowadays with different kinds of reference books coming out, especially hers. I mean, like the entries are only about like, they're dense, but they're only like 1 inch long, right? Literally, you could just like open it up, read it, and then close it. Keep it in the bathroom if you want. Just saying.
Next to Dreyer's English.
Exactly.
Yeah. All of this will bring energy to your work, to your recipes, to your writing, because it's sparking ideas, it's sparking creativity, it's sparking thought, and that's going to make your work come to life.
Yeah.
One more book to mention before we wrap up. It's about to come out, so we haven't read it yet, but it's called Flavorama. It's the guide to unlocking the art and science of flavor by Ariel Johnson, who's a flavor scientist. And the great Harold McGee, we didn't mention his book, but he's pretty much the guy who wrote the first like science reference book that everyone had to have in culinary school on their shelf. He calls this book essential reading for anyone who's serious about understanding deliciousness and how to create it. So I'm hoping a book like that, to Andrea's point, kind of branches out. It's not going to have the strict cultural sort of parameters. It's going to be really talking on a molecular level on how flavor works. And it also has like cute illustrations. And I heard her speak once. I can't remember if it was in person or in some sort of online TED Talk thing. She was great. And I remember like, it was, I don't know, almost a decade ago. And I was like, she should have a book. This is really interesting. So lo and behold, I'm very excited for that title for this spring.
All right. Maybe we can get her on the show.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. Well, on that note, this was a great, fun talk.
I'm sorry it's over.
Yeah, we'll have to do it
I could
again.
talk to you guys about.
I could go all day with this.
I know.
Right.
But
right.
I
I know.
we got to write.
We
Yeah,
gotta
right.
write.
We gotta get back to
write.
And we got to cook.
Right? Cook, create, and all that fun stuff. But this has been a delightful chat, just a way to, branch out from our usual programming and hopefully maybe spark some inspiration for all of you out there. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Kate.
Thank you, Kate.
Thank you for listening to Everything Cookbooks. For more episodes and ways to contact us, go to our website, everythingcookbooks.com. This show is available on Apple Podcasts or wherever you get your audio. And if you like what you hear, please leave us a review. It really helps other people find the show. Any book mentioned in the show will be found on our affiliate page at bookshop.org. Thanks, as always, to our editor, Abby Cirquitella. And until next time, keep on writing, reading, cooking, and writing some more.